There we go. Okay. All right. Social perception, how we come to understand other people. This chapter looks at the tools and strategies people use to construct social reality. We ask about the cognitive processes involved when individuals are attempting to make sense of the world. What mechanisms come into play when we form impressions of others and make judgments about their behavior and motives? How accurate are these impressions and judgments, and what accounts for errors in perception and judgment that seem to inevitably occur in social interactions? How do we put all of the social information together to get a whole picture of our social world? And of course, all of this is changing because of the internet. All of this is changing because of TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. Our reality isn't just what we see in our the environment we can feel. It's what we see on the computer screen. So all of this is changing, and that's your job, not mine. I'm too old. I'm not going to have to worry about this much longer. Not that I'm not going to be. I'm still going to be a psychologist, but I won't be a working psychologist because I'm 75. I can't be a psychologist forever. Well, I can't work in psychology forever. I can't teach forever. I don't think I can anyway. Maybe Wilson can, but I think they're going to make me stop pretty soon. So there you go. And sometimes I can't think of words. My memory's starting to slip a little bit. We'll see how it slips in this lecture. Social psychologists interested in cognition are primarily concerned with how the individual tries to make sense out of what is occurring in his or her world under the uncertain conditions that are part of normal life. As we make sense of our social world and form impressions, we use two forms of processing: automatic processing and controlled processing. Now, one of the interesting things I want you to notice is when there is a reference to an article that someone has written. This was written in 1999. The internet was invented in 1993. So we've got 26 years of brand new realities that Michelle never even saw. Okay, a lot. We've had a lot. A lot has changed. Facebook didn't exist. Instagram, TikTok is only about a decade old. So the realities that you guys know that you're interacting with, these psychologists, these social psychologists didn't have a clue about. Something that you need to think about as we go through this lecture. Automatic processing is any type of information processing that primarily occurs without conscious intention or control. Automatic processes have largely two origins. Some automatic processes seem to be innate. We automatically interpret an upturned mouth as a smile. We automatically infer that the smiling person is pleased or happy. Such interpretations and inferences, which may be built into our genetic makeup, are beyond our conscious control. And one thing that we can see artificial smiles, and we can see this in the mouth. It may be exactly the same smile as far as the mouth is concerned. But if the eyes aren't involved in that smile, then it is an artificial smile, something that you need to remember. I think we'll talk about this later on in the lecture. The second type of automatic process is the product of well-practiced activities like reading, which is what I'm doing. The methods we use to judge other people is a thread that seems to be part of our human makeup, our tendency to prefer the least effortful means of processing social information. And we try to do it's we would be struggling too much if we went after the most complex ideas out there. So we go with what is the easiest way of interpreting a situation. We have a limited capacity to understand information and can deal with only relatively small amounts at any one time. We tend to be cognitive misers in the construction of social reality. Being a cognitive miser means that because humans have a limited capacity to understand information, we deal with only small amounts of social information and prefer the least effortful means of processing it. Unless motivated to do otherwise, we use just enough effort to get the job done. In this business of constructing our social world, we are pragmatists, social misers. We use easy ways. We interpret things the easiest way we possibly can. If the conditions are right, we will bring our willful, conscious information processes online. In this case, we would be using controlled processing. Controlled processing involves conscious awareness, attention to the thinking process, and effort. If it is defined by several factors. First, we know that we are thinking about something. Second, we are aware of the goals of the thought processes. And third, we know that choices we are making. We are making these choices, and we're doing it consciously. Automatic thinking, it just happens. But controlled thinking doesn't. Controlled thinking is us processing all this information, as much information as possible. Even though we may speak about automatic and controlled processes as if they are dichotomies, there is no clear line between automatic and controlled processing. They exist on a continuum ranging from totally automatic, such as your reflexes, to totally controlled, figuring out a difficult math problem, with degrees of more and less automatic thinking in between, like driving. Now, how much thinking are we doing as we're driving? Many of our daily activities, such as driving, consist of both automatic and controlled processes. The process by which we make judgments about others is called impression formation. We are primed by our culture to form impressions of people, and Western culture emphasizes the individual, the importance of what is inside the person as the cause of behavior. We also may be programmed biologically to form impressions of those who might help or hurt us. It is conceivable that early humans who survived were better at making accurate inferences about others and thus have superior survival chances, and those abilities are part of our genetic heritage. And I'm not sure what they're doing, trying to figure out if somebody is a friend or an enemy. Forming an accurate impression of others is more complex than meets the eye, as impression accuracy depends on a few factors. Human and Bisanz in 2011 report that well-adjusted individuals show higher levels of normative accuracy than less well-adjusted individuals. Well-adjusted individuals also saw more similarity between their own personality characteristics and those of others than did less well-adjusted individuals. In other words, less well-adjusted individuals see other people as different than them. And better adjusted people see other individuals as more similar to them. And of course, Calvin wants to know what's well-adjusted. The chicken has cut the head off of the human. Another factor contributing to impression accuracy is one's level of emotionality. King noted that the ability to recognize the emotions of others is crucial to social interaction and an important marker of interpersonal competence. King found that our ability to accurately read other individuals' emotions depends on our own emotional socialization. This personal experience with emotional expressivity, King reasoned, should have an effect on our ability to determine the emotional state of other people. Edwards et al. Have, in 1999, have shown that depressed people are much more tuned to social information and put more effort into trying to determine why people react to them as they do. Depressed people often have problems with social interactions, and this vigilance is aimed at trying to figure out why and perhaps alter these interactions for the better. Edwards and colleagues pointed out that depressed people behave in ways that turn others off. Depressed people have trouble with eye contact, voice pitch, and other gestures, which arouses negative reactions in others. The accuracy of our impressions of others also relates to the target person's characteristics. Physical attractiveness stereotype implies that what is beautiful is good. In other words, we tend to assume that physically attractive individuals have a wide range of positive characteristics, such as they're more friendly, they're warmer, they're more intelligent, and less than less attractive people do. So if you're ugly, you're less friendly, you're less warm, and you're dumb as dirt. How's that? So pretty people are so many positive things. First impressions, or the primacy effect, can leave such a strong lasting impression that an individual will maintain the impression even in the face of overwhelming conflicting impressions. First impressions become perhaps the most important key in information integration. Even in the face of new and conflicting information, what should prompt us to reconsider, most people will stick to their initial judgment. This is known as belief perseverance. Research shows that belief perseverance won't allow jurors to ignore inadmissible evidence. Belief perseverance also explains why scientists have a hard time discounting fabricated published data. People find inconsistent thoughts uncomfortable and unpleasant, thus we go with our initial thoughts, and because it takes less effort. One of the things that the scientists, it took them, there was one study that showed that autism was caused by vaccinations. There was one study. It was a small study back in the 90s, and people just latched onto that. Oh, my autism is caused by the vaccinations. The study was of only 12 children. And because of that, because of this one study, this has been refuted over and over and over and over again. But this belief perseverance that autism is caused by vaccinations has persisted despite the fact that statistics show that the number of autistic children of vaccinated children and unvaccinated children is exactly the same. The statistics are exactly the same. There's as much autism in unvaccinated children as there is in vaccinated children. So why in the world are we even talking about this? I mean, if it was one study, because people latched on to that piece of information, and you can't get people to stop thinking that. Belief perseverance. First impressions, or the primacy effect, can leave such a strong lesson. Oh, did I go the wrong direction? Can leave such a strong lasting impression that an individual will maintain the impression even in the face of overwhelming conflicting impressions. Wait a minute. Same thing twice. It doesn't take much to develop an idea that that is difficult to change. When someone makes meaningful conclusions about another person's personality based on a brief encounter, it is called thin slicing. So if you met the Pope, you'd probably only meet him for a couple minutes, probably not very many seconds, but you may have a really positive idea about who he is, and that would be known as thin slicing. We can use first impressions and nonverbal communication to our advantage by public speaking, make sure that the opening is strong, job interviews, dress, eye contact, body posture, all affect evaluations, and handshake quality affects assessments of personality and final hiring recommendations. There's a trend in modern American culture towards self-expression through body art, such as tattoos and body piercings. Does the choice of body art affect the first impressions that others form of you? And the answer to this question is yeah. In one study by Akor in 2001, he had employers view videotapes of potential job applicants and evaluate them. Akor found that applicants with an eyebrow piercing were rated less favorably than applicants without the piercing. A similar effect was found for the presence of absence of tattoos. Rezanoff, in 2008, had participants judge a photograph of a female model with or without a tattoo. Rezanoff found that the model with the tattoo was rated more negatively than the same model without the tattoo. Now the question is, all of this was done like 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 24 years ago. Have things changed? We have, what is that guy's name? He's got facial tattoos, and he's a country and western singer. Can't think of his name. Anyway, I have cousins. I have nieces and nephews that have full body art. I mean, it's all up and down, every place but their face and their neck. Um, and they're all fairly successful. I was surprised to see Scarlett Johansson has a huge tattoo on her back, right between her shoulder blades. How popular is this? Is this acceptable in today's world? These things change, so don't take this at face value. Not today, because we're in 2025, and body art might be more important today than it ever was before. But an interesting story. I had a colleague that actually worked at Diné College, and one day I was sitting beside her, and I looked up and saw that she had had piercings in her eye, all the way across her right eye. So she was wearing body piercing all across her eye, but she had taken them out and they had healed. And I asked her about it, and she said that when she became a PhD, she took out all of her piercings because she was afraid that it would affect her job, the fact that she would be able to get a job as a PhD. I fed them. Yeah. In 2005, only about 5% of American adults had a profile on social media. Today, almost 3/4 of American adults have a profile on at least one social network site. And I do. I have a Facebook site. YouTube and Facebook are the most popular of these social media sites. That is as of 2020, but who knows what's going on today. Most people on social media tell stories full of self-aggrandizing posts. For example, exotic vacation pictures, recent career, or school accomplishments. Obviously, people like to put their best foot forward on social media and present a positive image of themselves. Different elements of a user profile can provide perceivers with clues to different aspects of the profile owner's personality. Observers use the number of friends a person has on social media as a clue to accurately estimate that person's level of extroversion. Friends' comments can be an accurate clue as to how conscientious a person is. People whose friends' comments on their posts are generally supportive are viewed as more conscientious. Hall in 2013 found that people who posted excessive political or news stories were accurately seen as less agreeable. One personality trait that seems hard to accurately predict from social media profile is neuroticism. Cultures around the world are different because of the need to adapt differently to different environments. However, there are some norms that cultures universally maintain. The incest taboo is one. There is some form of friendship, respect the friend's privacy, make eye contact while talking, don't divulge things said in confidence, and people of higher status are talked to using formal talk while those of lower status are spoken to familiarly. Language is a strong social identifier. Higher status people are spoken to in a formal manner, and they will speak back to a subordinate in a more familiar manner, using their first names, for example. In most languages, there are two forms of the word you, one that is formal and one used with friends and intimates. In most circumstances, it is for the higher status person to suggest familiarity with the lower status person. I'm sure you have heard that 80% of communication is nonverbal. This is why someone with autism spectrum disorder has a problem communicating. They must be taught to attend to people when they are trying to communicate in order to understand the person better. People lower on the autism spectrum, what used to be called Asperger's syndrome, can learn to attend to people easier, and for that reason, they often seem like they have no problems. And actually, I have a friend. I ran track with him in college, and he became a college professor. Um, he, he, he's kind of amazing. He has Asperger's syndrome, or at least I've diagnosed him with Asperger's syndrome. He has a hard time looking you in the eye. It's really kind of interesting. And when he was lecturing, he's a very attractive man, and for that reason, he was a very successful teacher because he's so pretty. And I've seen him lecture before, and when he lectures, he doesn't look at his students. He looks down at his notes. But like Indiana Jones, he was one of those very attractive men that women just flocked to. What else was I going to say about John? Um, and I remember he was in a fraternity. I was an independent, but he was in a fraternity. He would invite me to parties, and he'd be sitting there reading a book in the middle of all this chaos, people drunk and making noise, and he would be sitting there reading. He could concentrate on that despite all the loud music, all the drunk people throwing up around him. He was able to focus on his reading. I thought that was really kind of weird. Nonverbal cues serve as a variety of functions. They help us express our emotions. They help us to express our attitudes. They help us to express our personality. They cue us as to the emotions of others. They cue us as to the attitudes of others. They cue us as to the personality of others. The idea that humans communicate through facial expressions goes back to Charles Darwin's The Expressions of the Emotions in Man and Animal. And that was a book written in 1872. This is a modern example of it. Darwin's idea was that primary facial expressions are universal. All humans encode their emotions onto their faces in the form of expressions. All humans can therefore interpret or decode the expressions accurately. Darwin felt that facial expressions are so expressive because they were necessary ways of communicating before the strength of language. Early hominids would make a bad face when they tasted something terrible, and that would warn all the other hominids to stay away from. Those look like lima beans. No, they're peas, English peas. My wife hates English peas too. 6 major emotions: disgust, happy, surprise, fear, sadness, and anger are the 6 major emotions. Anger, sadness, surprise, fear, happy, and disgust. Universal facial expressions, that's contempt, and that's anxiety, shame, and determination, embarrassment, envy, pride, and not impressed. Decoding facial expressions tends to be complicated when the individual is experiencing more than one emotion and all are registered on the face. This is known as affect blending. A facial expression may be ambiguous, and interpretation depends on context and cues. Culture may dictate how a facial expression is interpreted. Each culture will maintain their own display rules for facial expressions and nonverbal communication. The United States cultural norms discourage emotional displays in men. In Japan, women are discouraged from showing strong emotion and, in fact, will cover their mouths if any emotion is evident. In the United States, the dominant culture admires direct eye contact and equates it with honesty. But in many native cultures and around the world, it is considered rude. In places like Nigeria, direct eye contact is considered rude. Puerto Rico, Thailand, and in Japan. In Arab countries, their direct eye contact tends to be quite intense. As a matter of fact, by U.S. standards, it is considered piercing or rude. One aspect of nonverbal communication that doesn't register with most people is personal space. Some countries demand a great deal of personal space and others little. The English maintain the most personal space. That's North Americans, Northern Europeans, Asians, Pakistanis, and most Native American groups. Oh, these, yeah, okay. It's kind of interesting. I had a colleague when I was at Dene actually, who was from Canada. So she's of English extraction. I'm from Indiana. We are English as well. When we used to talk to each other, we'd be across the room. That's as close as we wanted to get to each other because our personal space was so large, which was kind of weird. So anytime I took a step forward, she took a step backward. Anytime she took a step forward, I took a step backward. It was like yelling at each other. That's why oh, okay. Other countries have far less personal space when they converse. They want to be close enough to touch the other person. This happens in France, Southern Europe, Middle East, and South America. It's interesting. You go to France, and these people are right in each other's faces, and they're tapping each other the whole time. They're touching each other when they talk. In the United States and much of the world, flashing two fingers is a symbol of peace, victory, or two. In the rest of the English-speaking world, if you make the gesture with your palm toward you, it means the same as the middle finger gesture. So there you go. Thumbs up has only positive connotations in much of the world, but in the Middle East, Italy, and Greece, it means up yours and is undesirable. In the United States, making a circle with your index finger and thumb means A-OK, but in France, Venezuela, Turkey, and Brazil, it means zero or worthless. In Japan, it is a symbol for money. The summoning gesture in the United States means death in Singapore and Japan. In most of the world, left-handed people are tolerated for their backward use of hands and no one cares. In the Middle East, India, Sri Lanka, and Africa, the use of the left hand for anything isn't tolerated because it is the hand you wipe yourself with. Hand gestures that are universally recognized in select cultures are referred to as emblems. Emblems are not universal, and this can sometimes lead to trouble. In 1992, President George H.W. Bush thought he was flashing the peace sign, but because he was in Australia, it was the equivalent as the finger, giving people the finger. And that's the symbol right there. We already saw that back here. There we go. We already saw that back here. There we go. Whoops. In Norway, in 2005, George W. Bush was meeting a crowd of well-wishers when someone in the audience yelled, "Texas." The president immediately threw up the hook 'em horns sign of the University of Texas Longhorns. Unfortunately, in Norway, the hand gesture is the sign of the devil. Whoops. We know the human face processing occurs in the occipital temporal cortex, and that other parts of the brain are involved in determining the identity of the person. We also know that we are quite good at determining basic information about people from their faces. We know that getting information from faces is hardwired in our brains, and we know where that wiring is. People are not very good at detecting deception. People are just slightly above chance levels, guessing, when detecting deception. However, we are slightly better at detecting the truth. So we can tell the truth, but sometimes it's hard to tell if somebody's lying. An examination of over 1,300 studies concerning lying has shown how faint the traces of deception are. This massive review indicates that there are 158 cues to deception, but many of them are faint or counterintuitive, things that you might not expect. Liars say less than truth tellers and tell stories that are less interesting, less compelling. So they talk less. The stories liars tell are more complete and more perfect. Liars think more about what they are going to say than do truth tellers. Work done by Carvey, Cuddy, and Yap in 2010 showed that merely by standing in a high-power pose, an individual could raise their testosterone level and feel more confident. Now, this Carvey is Dana Carvey, the comedian, oddly enough. These are high power poses. So if you want to show people that you're dominant, there you go. Low power poses, you're all closed up. Low power poses, you're really closed up. Attribution theory is a theory that tries to explain others' behavior. Attribution tends to be attributed either to external causes or internal causes. For example, researchers have discovered that men are more likely to attribute a woman's friendliness to mild sexual interest. This is known as misattribution. This particular misattribution may be one of the main contributing factors to male behavior that women consider sexual harassment or rape. Males universally tend to be more sexually assertive than women. This may be one reason why 23% of women say that they have been forced into unwanted sex, while only 3% of men admit to forcing a woman into an unwanted sex act. Unfortunately, the more sexually aggressive a male, the more likely he is to misread women's communication. Fritz Heider was a Gestalt psychologist who first proposed the attribution theory in 1958. Heider noted that when someone else does something, gets in front of you in traffic, it is because of internal reasons, because they are evil or they are looking for revenge. When we do something that could be considered incorrect, we tend to attribute it to external causes. I'm only doing it because I'm late. I'm not a jerk. I'm not evil. And there's my kids. I thought this is a long time ago. It's 23 years ago. That's me 23 years ago. And that's my daughter. That's my son. They look very different from that. First of all, he doesn't have that much hair anymore. And she teaches high school. He or she was a physical therapist. That's not right. She was a kinesiologist. And he was a bartender. Now he is a cryptanalyst. I was still a college professor. And she's a first grade. She's a science teacher in high school. When studying about causes of behavior, we can make one of two attributions. Internal dispositional attribution infers that a person is behaving in a certain way because of something about the person, their attitude, their character, their personality. External situation attribution infers that a person is behaving a certain way because of something about the situation, assuming most people would respond the same way in that situation. The covariation model is a theory that states that to form an attribution about what caused a person's behavior, we systematically note the pattern between the presence or absence of possible causal factors and whether or not the behavior occurs. Kelly in 1971 assumes that when we are in the process of forming an attribution, we gather information or data. The data we use, according to Kelly, are how a person's behavior covaries or changes across time, place, different actors, and different targets of the behavior. By discovering covariation in people's behavior, you're able to reach a judgment about what caused their behavior. The covariation model focuses on observations of behavior across time, place, actors, and targets. It examines how the perceiver chooses either an internal or an external attribution. That was 50 years ago. We make choices about internal versus external attributions by using three pieces of information. Consensus, the extent to which other people behave the same way toward the same stimulus as the actor does. Distinctiveness, the extent to which one particular actor behaves in the same way to different stimuli. And consistency, the extent to which the behavior between one actor and one stimulus is the same across time and circumstances. Every time this happens, this is how they act. Internal attribution occurs when consensus is low. Behavior is unique to the person. Distinctiveness is low. Person displays the same behavior with different targets and in different situations. Consistency is high. The person's behavior occurs reliably across occasions. External attribution occurs when consensus is high, other people behave similarly in the same situation. Distinctiveness is high, the person behavior is specific to that situation or target, and consistency is high. The person's behavior occurs reliably across occasions. While information about all three dimensions may not be available, people will still make attributions. Most frequently, consistency and distinctiveness are used more than consensus. Attribution is usually a two-step process. When something happens to us involving someone else, our first instinct is to detect an internal attribution. This may be an evolutionary reaction to protect us from a possible attacker. Hopefully, we are open-minded enough to reevaluate our initial response and possibly adjust our initial reaction. Adjustment, however, requires effort and conscious attention. It doesn't always happen. We take personal credit for all of our successes. We blame our failures on someone else. One domain in which self-serving bias may be particularly common is the world of sports, especially among solo athletes for whom the entire weight of winning or losing rests on their shoulders. To maintain their own egos, they must find anyone else to blame for their failures. One form of defensive attribution is to believe that bad things happen only to bad people, or at least only to people who make stupid mistakes or poor choices. Therefore, bad things won't happen to us because we won't be that stupid or careless. Melvin Lerner called this the belief in a just world, the assumption that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get. There are good things and bad things about just world beliefs. It helps people deal with feelings of vulnerability and mortality, but unfortunately it often leads to blaming the victim, rape victims or battered wives. When we think of our own attributional biases and other people's biases, we feel or we know that other people have more biases than we do, and this is known as bias blind spot. Humans are amazingly adaptive creatures. A small change in a social situation will affect drastically how a person feels and reacts to the social circumstance. The difficulty for the social scientist is gauging which factor is the most important, the individual's internal criteria or the change in the social situation. Thus, people assume that what is presented is the legitimate and perpetual feelings of the actor. This is called the fundamental attribution error. When Sylvia plays paintball, she becomes quite aggressive. Tobin had only seen her at the paintball field, so when he saw her at the grocery with her school friends, he greeted her very loudly and called her Mad Dog. The friends had never seen her playing paintball, so they teased the shy girl mercilessly. The male ego seems to use the fundamental attribution error often to maintain his ego. Peter Ditto set up an experiment where men met a woman and then the woman rated the men on her impression of them. The men then guessed whether the woman liked them or not. When they were told that her negative criticism was part of the experiment, they discounted what she said. But when they were told that her positive comments were part of the experiment, they didn't believe it. They still thought she was attracted to them. Even when we know different, we assume that other people are the way that they act. When trying to explain our own behavior, we tend to attribute behavior to situations. I was angry because everything was going wrong. When explaining other people's behavior, their behavior is what they are. He is hostile because he is an angry person. Voters come to like just elected candidates, and this is called the honeymoon period. Contestants value prizes more just after receiving them. People develop an instant liking for those they are about to meet. When Germain goes to parties, he's always amazed at how easily everyone melds with each other. He always feels shy and tense. The reality is probably that everyone feels pretty much the same as Germain. Researchers have known for decades that there is a difference between the perspective of being an actor in an event and an observer in that event. When we are the actor, the environment around us commands our attention. When we watch an event, we watch the actor in the event, and the environment becomes less visible. Thus, the person we see as the focus is always the cause, and this is known as perceptual salience. Celeste was working undercover with the meth suppliers in Gallup. Word got back to her that her cover was blown. As she walked past Smokey's Roadhouse on her way to her pickup, she heard a speeding car behind her. She turned and drew her pistol. She caught sight of a man sticking a rifle out of the window and fired just as the car swerved into oncoming traffic. As Mary pulled out of Gasmax just across the street from Smokey's, she saw a woman draw a gun, wheel around toward traffic, and fire indiscriminately at a car trying to get out of the way. The car plowed into oncoming traffic. When questioned on the witness stand, she did not see the rifle or perceive the car as speeding. When we analyze the behavior of others, we often find ourselves asking, what would I have done? This is our search for consensus information. What do other people do when we lack such information? In doing this, we often overestimate the frequency and popularity of our own views of the world. The false consensus bias is simply the tendency to believe that everyone else shares our own feelings and behavior. The notion of self-fulfilling prophecies suggests that we often create our own realities through our expectations. If we are interacting with members of a group we believe to be hostile and dangerous, our actions may provoke the very behavior we're trying to avoid. This does not mean that we inhabit a make-believe world in which there is no reality to what we think and believe. It does mean, however, that our expectations can alter the nature of social reality. One type of self-fulfilling prophecy is behavioral confirmation. This phenomenon occurs when perceivers behave as if their expectations are correct, and the targets then respond in ways that confirm the perceiver's beliefs. When we read about behavioral confirmation, we are looking at the role of the target's behavior in confirming the perceiver's beliefs. In behavioral confirmation, the social perceiver uses the target's behavior, which is partly shaped by the perceiver's expectations, as evidence that the expectations are correct. When we make attributions about the causes of events, we routinely overestimate the strength of our hypothesis. We do this by the way that we search for information concerning our hypothesis, typically tending to engage in a search strategy that confirms rather than disconfirms our hypothesis. And this is known as confirmation bias. A good example would be news programs. So if you're conservative, you probably watch conservative news, and conservative news confirms your biases. If you're liberal, you probably watch liberal news, which also confirm your liberal biases. As cognitive misers, we have a grab bag of tools that help us organize our perceptions effortlessly and automatically. These shortcuts, handy rules of thumb that are part of our cognitive arsenal, are called heuristics. Like illusions, heuristics help us make sense of the social world, but also like illusions, they can lead us astray. The availability heuristic is defined as a shortcut used to estimate the frequency or likelihood of an event based on how quickly examples of it come to mind. The availability heuristic tends to bias our interpretations because the ease with which we can imagine an event affects our estimate of how frequently that event occurs. Television and newspapers tend to cover only the most visible violent events. People therefore tend to overestimate incidents of violence and crime, as well as the number of deaths from accidents and murder, because these events are most memorable. As with all cognitive shortcuts, a biased judgment occurs because the sample of people and events that we remember is unlikely to be fair and full. Sometimes we make judgments about the probability of an event or a person falling into a category based on how representative it is or the person is of that category. When we make such judgments, we are using the representativeness heuristic. This heuristic gives us something very much like a prototype, an image of the most typical member of that category. The base rate fallacy is a type of fallacy in which people tend to ignore the base rate, general prevalence, in favor of the individuating information pertaining only to a specific case. It is the tendency to underuse base rate data and to rely on the spatial characteristics of the person or situation. Base rate fallacy. Counterfactual thinking is the tendency to create positive alternatives to a negative outcome that actually occurred, especially when we can easily imagine a more positive outcome. Any event that has a negative outcome but allows for a different and easily imagined outcome is vulnerable to the counterfactual thinking, an imagined scenario that runs opposite to what really happened. While winners are always happy, research has shown that the unhappiest person on a three-tiered winners podium is the second-place finisher. The second-place finisher thinks about how he didn't come in first. The third-place finisher is happy because he didn't come in fourth and not win a medal. And as you can see, the gold is happy, the bronze is happy, the silver ain't happy. First is happy, third is happy, second ain't happy at all. First is happy, second is happy. First is happy, third is happy, second ain't happy at all. Happy, happy, not happy. And there you go. Okay, so I'll talk to you next week. Maybe. Yes.